Reggie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector, and I want to welcome you to another one of my live streams. I am excited about a lot of the live streams that I do, and this one is no exception because on this show, I am joined by my buddy Ben. This guy and I have become friends ever since he became a subscriber of the channel, and I had an opportunity to spend some time with him, but this is the first time that he's been on the live show. So, Ben, a big welcome to you, brother. I want to thank you for taking time out to actually join me.
Reg, thank you for having me. It's been a long time. Happy to be here.
Yeah, and I just saw you on Sunday at the Berkeley Comic Show. Didn't talk to you all that much because you were busy working the table with Chris, but it was good to see you then, and it's definitely good to see you now on the show.
Thank you. It was a fun show.
Oh, good. There was a little bit of a disaster after with the break-in of that SUV. Just some sad stuff that happened, man. That's definitely. I did not enjoy hearing about that, you know. But before we get too deep into the show, I actually want to take a moment to say hello to a couple of people that have joined us here in the chat. Wolf Mode 88 is here. Wayne McDonald is here. I like donuts. I do like donuts, but I also like it when I Like Donuts 57 shows up for the live stream. Brother, it is good to see you. Tina is here. Knights of Old is in the house. Chris Barrett is here. And of course, Ben goes by Tech31 Kid, so he is actually in the live stream as well. Bake the Snake is here, as is Victor, and can't get enough. It is good to see you guys, and I want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your day to actually join us on this live stream. As I just said on Instagram a couple of moments ago, we are going to be looking at some amazing Alex Schomburg covers. And basically what I said is, if you are a fan of Alex Schomburg, if you are a fan of rare comics, if you are a fan of just really cool comics, you definitely want to be part of this live stream. And one other reminder that I'll give you guys is that if you are watching this either now in the room or on replay and you have not yet subscribed to the channel, you definitely want to do that. You definitely want to hit that button so that you can stay abreast of all the content that I release on a weekly basis. A couple of more people have just popped in here. Eric is in here. Harvey Abel is in the house. Bob the 31st is here, and CW Comic Sales is in the house. Chris, it is good to see you, brother. And it is also good to see Chris Barrett in here as well. I want to again thank you guys for taking time out to join Ben and I in this live stream. So Ben, I have a couple of questions for you because there are some people here that don't know you. There's a lot of people that know you because you're often in the live chats and you comment a lot and you oftentimes correct me when I get things wrong, but they don't know you as a person. So I want to spend a little time just talking about who you are as an individual, okay? And one of the first questions that I want to ask is, how long have you been collecting? And part two, how did you get started collecting?
That's a good question, Reg. Um, I started collecting because of artwork, actually. I wanted to draw, I wanted to learn how to draw, and my aunt, who was 10 years older than me, said, why don't you start looking at, comic strips in the Sunday papers? So I started looking at the Peanuts and Garfield and just try to copy them frame by frame.
Okay.
And she actually had a couple of comic books laying around. So she would give me some comic books. And at the time, the Electric Company and Spider-Man was really big. You probably remember that, all those old folks.
And no, I'm not old. I'm not old.
I just dated myself. So I basically started looking at Spider-Man as one of the characters, and he was in the comic strip in the newspapers. So that's probably the quick answer as far as how I got started.
Okay.
So yeah.
So did you ever continue that pursuit of, drawing? Did you go to art school? Have you ever drawn professionally or any of that kind of stuff?
No, I never drawn professionally, but I did win a couple of art contests in 5th and 6th grade. I did a lot of still lifes and poses, and I was used to copying frames from the comic strip. So but when I started getting into the comics, I kind of stopped drawing a little bit because I was more interested in reading and looking at other artwork.
Got it.
So to answer your question about how long, probably the better part of the last 33 years, minus a 6-year break in middle school and high school.
Wow.
I've been involved in comics.
That is crazy. I didn't realize that it had been that long, to be honest with you. I mean, I probably have collected probably 4, 6 years, and that was the period in which time you did not collect. I mean, that's impressive. A 30-year track record of collecting comics, and you're only 34. I mean, that's really impressive. Really impressive stuff right there. Did your aunt, was your aunt like a big collector, or did she just happen to have a couple of comics around that kind of caught your attention?
She was an artist. She drew really well. She would take the Sports Illustrateds that my dad had, and her and her sister used to buy Archie comics. And I remember she had a couple of old Avengers comics. She wasn't a big collector, but she was more interested in drawing, and that's why she wanted to learn how to draw. And we hung out. We spent a lot of time together. She was basically like an older sister to me.
Hmm.
And I think I always attribute her into me wanting to get into comics. But then number two, I have to say my mom is responsible, because my mom bought me a lot of books from the school that you would order, and then she would take me to comic shops, and she encouraged me to read by providing me with reading material. So I think those two women in my life probably set the course and created a monster.
That's awesome, man. That is awesome, man. I mean, what they helped to create is a monstrous collection, because I've only seen part of your collection, and it's actually quite impressive. And again, this is one of those things where I ask people these questions, and I honestly have no clue what the answer is going to be. But oftentimes I find myself pleasantly surprised at the responses, and so that is a fantastic background. So your aunt got you started. She was 10 years older than you, and that's kind of what got you started down this path of looking at Spider-Man and trying to draw on some other things. When you think about the last 30 some odd years of your collecting, if you had to describe the type of collector that you are, how would you encapsulate that in a couple of sentences?
Well seasoned, I think, at this point. Somewhat sophisticated. As Chris knows, I'm a very detailed person. I like looking at artists and how they draw things, publications, how covers are cut, and why certain artwork never shows up, where signatures are, date stamps, just little weird things that most people may not care about, but I do. Uh,
I thought you were going to say notice. That's what I thought you were going to say. Go ahead, brother. I'm sorry.
So, but yeah, that's I like those little details. So, as far as progression, most people start out, back in the day, you might borrow a comic from somebody. For me, it was learning how to draw, looking at the cartoon and the comic strips, and then from there, starting to go to local comic shops, but even at 7-Eleven, just buying a lot of comics in the early 80s there. And then from that point, I started getting into Bronze Age X-Men.
Yep.
I really like Bronze Age X-Men. Then you start seeing that one Silver Age book on the wall. I remember it was like a $10 X-Men 6, and I ended up getting it. And back then, $10, that was my whole wad.
Brother, that was a lot of money back in the day.
I mean, I usually stayed in the $1 to $2 each, if I was lucky. But if I had $10, and I blew it all at once, and that was the only book I was going to get priced for 2 months.
That's a treasure as you go home. And so you kind of started out in the dollar bins. You progressed eventually to some Silver Age books. You didn't stop there, or you went to Bronze Age and then Silver Age, but you didn't necessarily stop there, right? I mean, you continued into the Golden Age, correct?
That's correct. In the middle school and high school years, I got into sports and, girls and, the whole 9 yards. And I didn't do that anymore. I wasn't into the comics. I mean, they were still in my closet, but I just didn't. They were dormant. And then as soon as I graduated high school, I went to 2 local comic book shows at the local mall,
Mm-hmm.
and I bought a Hulk #3 in the summer of 1993. I bought a Hulk #3. I don't remember how much it was, but it just grabbed me, and it revitalized me. And then I started pulling out the books that I had from before junior high, and I still had them. And I'd say from 93 to now, I've been collecting hard nonstop.
Is that the same Hulk book that you showed me when I was at your place? Is it the same book?
Unfortunately, unfortunately, it's not the same copy. No.
Okay. Okay. Do you consider yourself more of a buy and hold type of collector, or do you oftentimes bring books in, sell books off for whatever reason to buy other books? Like talk to us a little bit about like your philosophy for your collection, because a lot of people buy and hold. Some people bring books in, they flip them, modern books to buy older books. And then sometimes people are just a mixture of those things. Like where do you fall on that spectrum?
That's a good question. I think it's up until about early 2000s, I would always hold my books. I never bought books with the intention of selling them in the near future. I enjoyed the books, I enjoyed the artwork, the artist, and I never planned on selling them immediately. But I think when you got deeper into the golden age, the price points were just head scratchers, and so you have to make some decisions.
Yep.
You either have to sell silver to buy gold, or you have to try to save the money, to get the books you wanted. I did make one mistake, and I will never do this again. In the mid 2000s, I got caught up in high grade Fantastic Fours, early Silver Age, which are great books. I love the run, I still do. But I ended up selling a couple of my timelies at that
Mm,
time prematurely, and I'll never ever sell silver to buy gold again. I mean, sell gold to buy silver.
yeah.
Those two books, I'm going to actually show them today, but it took me quite a while to get both of those back. And within a year, I was out of the high grade game. It just didn't appeal to me. That was just me personally, because
Yeah.
once you have the book, for me, it doesn't matter whether it's a VG Fine or a VF Plus. It
Yep.
doesn't really matter. But that was before CGC. So before those days, you didn't have a nice shiny case with a nice label and a number in the corner.
Yeah.
And it was in a Mylar, so it was a little different. I mean, after
Mylar makes
2000,
everything look good, brother.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like spit and shine,
Yeah,
waxing the
man.
car.
Brother, you could have a 3 and it be in a Mylar and it looked like an 8. But I've had people say that to me, like, do you sell books to get other books? And I don't really. And then, one of the other questions is, do you sell books and upgrade that book? And part of it is like, if I have the book and it's a decent grade, I don't feel the need for the much higher grade because I already have the book. And oftentimes the grade that I get is good enough. Like, X-Men 5 back there is a great book. I would love to have a 6 or a 6.5, but the 5 is a good book and I have a good story to tell behind it. Like if it was super cheap, I'd be like, give me the 6.5, but it's not, it's not. There's going to have to be sacrifices made, you know? Um, but it sounds like one of your regrets was when you sold that gold to get the silver books chasing the Fantastic Four. What was the decision? What was the thought process behind that? Was there a thought there?
I had never experienced high grade anything,
Okay.
and I wanted to experience it. And that's one thing I'll probably always recommend to any collector that's still trying to find their way, is that you're going to find books that are cool, and then there are books that are cool, but you don't need to have in your collection.
Yep.
But you have to experience it, you have to own it, you have to chase it, and then once you get it, you'll start figuring out. And I've told Chris this. I told Chris, Hulk 181. I'm not a big bronze guy. I do like X-Men, the Bronze Age, but a Hulk 181, I realize what it is. Wolverine's cool. I wouldn't say that I'm in love with them, but I always have to have a 181 in the box.
Yeah.
I always have to, and that's one of the ones that I got to have one. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a good book. I mean, there's 10,000 of them on the census, but it's still a really good book. There's no doubt about that. So we've talked a little bit about like how you got started in collecting, what your philosophy is, what your approach is, some mistakes that you make, and we've all made mistakes, right? Some big, some small, but the goal is to always learn from those mistakes. But one of the things that I thought was interesting about you when we've spoken before, you made mention that you have a long history, as we've kind of already talked about, and at one point, and maybe even now, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you were or are an Overstreet advisor, correct?
That's correct.
Hey, are you now presently?
Correct.
Okay.
For about 4 or 5 years now.
Okay, so the Overstreet pricing guide is basically what we're referring to as Overstreet. Can you tell us a little bit about like what actually is an Overstreet advisor? And I've met many people that are like, I'm an advisor, or I've been an advisor, and I really don't have a full appreciation for what an advisor actually does. And so if you can break it down and give us some insight, I think we would all appreciate that.
That's a great question because I think the Overstreet guide is not used as much anymore, and for the correct reasons why. But back in 1970, Bob Overstreet was a huge collector of comics, arrowheads, coins. I think he even did stamps, and there was no media guide to show as far as values go. And we now know that books have been trading hands and being priced as early as the mid 60s. So in 1970, he created the first Overstreet price guide. And back then, up until the internet, the only way to get pricing information or market information was to ask people at shows, at
Word of mouth.
conventions. Yeah, word of mouth, mail order, what's going on, calling people on the telephone. I mean, it was snail mail, but that was the pulse, talking to people at shows, private sales. The pedigree collections were exploding with the Mile High and the San Franciscos at that time. So tracking and organizing was difficult and a challenge. So as people started giving him that information, as far as, I sold an FF1 for, $50 in near mint, in 1972, he would catalog that and use that to price his books. And back then it was only 3 grades: good, fine, and mint. And
simple.
Yeah.
Good,
Yeah.
bad, and ugly.
Yeah. I'll take mint.
Every day.
So, that changed though, with the advent of the internet, CGC grading, Go Collect, GPA, auction houses online. We can have that information immediately now. So what does that do to the price guide? Well, you look up X-Men 1 in the guide and it's going to be behind, because when we do our reports, we always send it in every December, and it's always going to be behind a year.
Yep.
And so what I'm writing about in December may not be the case when you're reading it in July of the next year. But back in the day, that was important because that's all we had. Mm-hmm. And so we were looking forward to the guide because we wanted to see how much Hulk #1 went up, because nobody knew, unless you knew a buddy that sold one, the last couple of months. That was pretty important. So as far as the guide goes today, as far as advisors, we also supply not only information on sales, but private sales. And then I also give my opinion and speculation on the market, how MCU and CGC grading, third-party grading has changed things. And there's some wonderful articles that sometimes we're asked to do, like this year is the 80th anniversary of Batman and Marvel Comics.
Yep.
So there's going to be some, DC. There'll be.
I got one right. I got a DC question right. Keep going, brother. I'm on a high note.
So there are some things in there, and I will say to the people that don't look at Overstreet, for the new collector, it is a tremendous resource still, especially if you're trying to learn how to grade. There are descriptions in there that you can go by. There's local comic shops in there. There's tons of dealers in there that are very knowledgeable and that are also Overstreet advisors. So from that standpoint, it is valuable, and it is still used to price non-keys. If you have an Avengers 205, you're not going to look at GPA unless you have a 9.8 or a 9.9. But if you have a VG and you want to try to sell it, it gives you an idea. Okay, it's $3. Okay, you got to go by something, or you can go by eBay too. But for non-keys, I think it's still valuable. So
and part of the reason why you say that is because a key has more sales and maybe more things influencing the value of that book versus a filler issue like Avengers 205.
Correct.
Okay.
And the other thing too is, before CGC came out, we would look at the Overstreet to look at information. Nobody knew sometimes that, let's say, that there was a cameo in Hulk 180 for Wolverine, and that there was a first full appearance in 181. So you would use that as kind of a reference. It was kind of like a Wikipedia for information.
Yep.
So, take it for what it's worth. It's not really good to grade keys or to price keys with it, because most of the keys in there are going for double for what they really are in the book. So
but I'm hearing that there is still a lot of great information in there, articles and other additional information that could help a collector. I got a couple of follow-up comments, but I want to look at something that the people are saying in the room here. So Wolf Mode 88 is basically saying Mylar is the beer of comic supplies. A couple of people is making comments about when it goes in Mylar goggles. When the Mylar goes on, anything can happen, says Chris Barrett. Tina Cranston says Mylar goggles. Bob is saying Mylar style. So there's definitely some fans of Mylar. And I'm a big fan. When I'm out shopping, I actually take the book out of the Mylar, because if you're looking at it on the rack or even in your hand, sometimes you can't see all the defects and you have to take it out of the Mylar to be able to see it. But when you're at home, though, you put it in the Mylar because it looks a whole lot sexier that way. But what's interesting, though, being about some of the things that you said, is that when I was at WonderCon, there were still dealers that were actually using Overstreet to price their books. And mind you, they were looking at filler issues, because I'm working on the run of Amazing Spider-Man. So they weren't keys that they were looking up. They were looking up filler issues and giving me a value based upon the condition of the book and an Overstreet price. And I thought that was a wonderful way to go, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, someone that's at a garage sale who found a bunch of junky comics in their attic that, you know, they've taken it around and said, okay, there's nothing worth here, you know. They could use the guide and go, okay, well, I got a bunch of $6 to $10 books here according to this guide, assuming that they're graded properly. And then you and I would go in there and I would probably look at the same thing. You know, if I'm going to buy a filler book, let's say I want to read a story and there's 5 parts to it, it's not a key, I'm going to grade it and go, okay, well, what's the guide say? You know, okay, $6. Okay, well, I know it's not $60, so I know it's at least 6 now. So,
right.
You know, it helps.
What's crazy is I went to go buy some books from a guy in Oakland. And I asked the guy, so how are you pricing these books? And he said, you know, there's all these pricing guides and stuff like that. And, you know, I pull out my books and he grabs the first book to price it, which is a pain if someone's trying to price an entire stack of books. And he's like, okay, this one's $20. And I'm like, no, it's not. I didn't even have to look. Like, I knew it wasn't $20. He was on Go Collect. Kid you not. He was on Go Collect trying to price it as if it were a slabbed book. And I'm like, here's why you can't use that. So I actually directed him to Comics Price Guide. I'm like, look at the raw prices over here. The book was $3, not $20. And then I even got the price down a little bit on that particular book. But there is some value to the Overstreet. And I think the background that you gave us on Overstreet and your role as an advisor is definitely very helpful. So I want to transition to the second part of sorry. Joe Joe is saying Reggie looks sexy in Mylar. Brother, I'm not wearing any Mylar, okay? You guys are hilarious. All right, so let's transition to the meat of this discussion. The first part was like setup as to who Ben is and who he is as a collector and as an advisor. But now we are going to talk about what Ben is really excited about, and that is Alex Schomburg. So Ben, as we transition to the second part, talk to me a little bit about what Alex Schomburg means for you, how you first discovered his work, and what were your first impressions of his work versus maybe your later impressions, if there were a difference between those.
I would say the Gerber photojournal that came out in 1989. I was exposed to that in 1995. I was in college and I met a collector actually in Brockton, Massachusetts. His name is Stephen Smith. Stephen, if you're watching this, I still remember you. Anyway, Stephen had offered me a book at the time. It was a Marvel Mystery Comics number 10. I had no idea what that looked like, what the cover looked like. It was missing the centerfold and he wanted $400 for it. And I said, well, what is that? He's like, you got to get a Gerber photojournal. I go, what is that? You know? He's like, it has all the covers of all the Golden Age books. So I said, okay. So I went to my local comic shop in college. I bought them. At the time, they were like $80 or $90 a piece. They're heavy. Ooh. You know, they're like behind you, right? You've got a couple. Yeah, there they are.
Goodness, brother. That's expensive.
I think they were. I remember paying like about $150 for both of them.
Yeah.
Now they're a lot cheaper. But they're a ton of bricks. I mean, they're so heavy. Yep. And I'm telling you, that was the wrong time for me to be studying that, because I studied those like SATs when I should have been studying for my midterms. I mean, so that book, Marvel Mystery 10, was probably the gateway, because I bought those photojournals because I wanted to know what it looked like. And we didn't have internet. I could, you know, there was indexes that were printed, but, you know, I didn't know which ones they were, and it was harder to access them. So I said, you know, I'm just going to get this photojournal. And it was all gravy after
So wait a minute, let's back up. Did you buy the book for $400?
I did not.
You did not, because you spent $150 on the Gerber guides.
Correct. And then I realized that there were better books than that I'd rather have for
Well
more
done.
than $400.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like add a zero on there. So here's what's cool. Here's what's cool about this conversation is that this is a wonderful tee up for a video that I have coming out this Friday. Now you might wonder what that video is on. It is on the Gerber guides. And that video was inspired by conversations that I had probably a month ago, maybe 2 months ago with Ben. So if you're interested in the Gerber photo guides, make sure you check out the video that I'm dropping Friday at 3:30 because it's going to go into a little bit more detail than what Ben is talking about now. I'll show you photos of it, blah, 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 blah. So Ben, getting myself back on track, when you got the Gerber guides finally for 150, that's where you discovered Alex Schomburg's work. Yes?
That's correct. That's correct. Because in the guides, not only does it have a scarcity index, but it also gives you the cover artists and the inking to who did what in what books. And I started seeing Schomburg on a lot of the things you see on my wall here. You know, a lot of these are Schomburgs, and I saw those for the first time in this photo journal, and I kept those things open on my desk. I was looking at them like every day. I kid you not. I was like, man, I got to study, man. I'm studying the wrong book here.
And they are like big encyclopedias. They are big and they are heavy. And I think Myrna, my mail lady, has just now forgiven me for having to carry those things up my stairs because I actually got 4 of them. And again, stay tuned to the video on Friday. So that's where you first discovered his work. But what was it about his work that spoke to you? If you can put that in context, was it the fact that you just kept seeing his name, or was there more to it that really caught your attention about Schomburg?
Two things. The busyness of the covers, the detail in busy covers, and then the poses. I'm really big on poses of the main character that is on the cover, and the way Schomburg was able to proportion the legs and the arms and the torso. And then for me, it's Captain America and the War Cry. You know, I love Captain America books where his mouth is wide open and he's about to kick some major butt. He just did it for me.
Yep.
So
kick some Nazi butt back in the day.
Yes.
So in preparation for this conversation, I actually pulled up some information which Ben has already kind of alluded to. So in the 40s, and this is around the time like Schomburg was like super busy, it's estimated that he actually created somewhere between 500 and 600 covers over the course of like that decade. And we're not, to Ben's point, talking about very simple covers. We're not just talking about him throwing a character on there with like a blown out background. This dude is known for cramming his covers full of like detail and action and making them almost like 3D. And I think you can look at some of his covers a couple of different times and notice different things just because there's so much stuff that's actually going on there with the characters and with the level of detail. And Ben, correct me if I'm wrong here, but in addition to like drawing his covers, I think he also mastered the art of like airbrushing. And one of the things that I was curious about is when he airbrushed a cover, at least again, according to the information that I found, he would, I guess, sign it and he would put his name in reverse. So instead of it being Alex, it would actually be XELA. Is that true? And if true, do you know why?
Yes, that is true. In the 20s and the 30s, Alex Schomburg started out as a pulp illustration artist. He was a master at drawing machinery, bridges, airplanes, tanks, guns, beautiful women, and of that nature. So when he started doing covers for Timely and for Nidor in 1939 to 1945, that's where he amassed those 500 plus covers.
Okay.
After the war, those covers were not as significant, and he wasn't being asked to draw those as much. So he started getting into airbrushing and getting back into the sci-fi pulps and the good girl art that he used to start doing. Mm-hmm. And at that time in the golden age, there were a lot of artists that had pen names. And Jack Kirby and Joe Simon, they did it as well. And the reason why they did that is oftentimes they were moonlighting for many publishers, doing work for multiple publishers to get money.
Mm,
And I think that Schomburg was in the same boat. He had to pay rent just like everybody else. But it was a time where I think he knew that the war was over, and that was a good thing for America and for the world. And now he was going to start doing a different type of cover. And I think he wanted to transition out of that. So he thought of the cool thing of just taking his name Alex and spelling it backwards
check
when he
that out.
signed when he signed all his airbrush covers. And so that's what's unique. Whereas the typical war cover, he'll usually have his Schomburg last name in a skinny box, a horizontal box, or without the box. It's kind of like finding Where's Waldo when you look for a signature, because he usually signed it. And if he didn't sign it, it probably got cut off in the original art. So it was
Got it.
probably
Got it.
somewhere. So,
Very cool. Your buddy Chris is in here and he says those photojournals will result in rapid bank account weight loss. He says use carefully. A couple of other comments in here. Jake Conrad says Golden Age cap is amazing and he loves your wall. What is Chris saying? Chris says forget Golden Age cap. It's about the Liefeld cap. Oh, you guys are nuts. You guys are hilarious. And your wall, and I think Tina also made a comment about your wall back there. It is a really nice wall. You don't put your comics on the wall though, right? Are those recreations that we're looking at right now?
those are 11 by 17 Kinko's copies.
They're really well done. Those are, I mean, gotta be 9.9s across the board on those. But I mean, it's
Some
a
of
way
the
to way to decorate the room without putting really expensive books on the wall. It makes sense.
to get the images that clear, you got to use like over 400 or 500 DPI on the resolution, which it took me some experimenting to do.
Hmm.
But yeah, they'll come out really clear like that. Some of the ones on my wall are actual photos or scans of the actual books that I do own.
Oh, that's
Uh,
hot.
some
That's
of them
cool.
are like this one, the USA. Where is it at? Right there, and the All Select. These two and this one. These three are ones that I own. That they're the real thing.
Very cool. I was actually in FedEx yesterday sending some books off to CGC, and they actually have posters of comic covers on a spinner rack in FedEx. And they actually had Neil Adams Batman cover. They had Wonder Woman. They had Flash Gordon. All of these like golden age classics they actually had on a spinner rack for sale as like posters, which I thought was really cool because someone earlier today was asking me for inexpensive decorations for their room. We just heard that you can do a scan at, what was it, 400 DPI, or you can just go to FedEx and buy some. Either way, you can have some really nice wall art, you know? Very
Yeah,
cool. So I appreciate the background on Schomburg and like him spelling his name in reverse. I think you actually came across something really cool earlier today. Do you want to tell people what you found? Because I think that folks may want to pick this up if they can.
yeah. So back in the day, there was a publication called the Comic Book Marketplace, and it was an offshoot of Overstreet. It was produced by Gary Carter, who was a big time collector at the time, and they came out with several of these. And this one is from August 1995, and this is one on Alex Schomburg. And there's a little small article in here. It talks about his early days working in pulps and transitioning into the golden age. And then talks about eventually how in 1954 he just disappeared. He transitioned from the golden age covers to the airbrush covers, and the early 50s he moved west to Washington and Oregon, and he didn't really leave any information, and people thought he died, but he just was done with comics, and he started doing a lot of informational real estate paintings, just some really odd things
Really?
that were non-comic related. So, and it wasn't until the late 70s, early 80s where he was contacted to do some commissions. San Diego Comic Con wanted him to come to accept an award, and but that was pretty much it. He moved west, and you really didn't hear from him at that point. So I would recommend this if you wanted to read more about Schomburg. It's got a great cover here with all the timely heroes, And it's a great article. Again, this is a Comic Book Marketplace number 26, August 1995. You could get them on eBay. If you get a really nice one, I think they can run as much as $20 or $30. Otherwise, they're usually $10 to $15 each.
Very nice. And Chris Barrett is asking a question, and I think you kind of alluded to it as well. But he's asking a question that Schomburg actually came back at some point to work on Invaders Annual #1. I think that I read that, but do you know for a fact, Ben, if that's true?
That's correct. That's correct. They finally were able to track him down in 1977. He did the annual to Invaders 1 with all the original timely characters with Submariner, Human Torch, and Captain America. And he did sign it the traditional way with the horizontal box. Interesting thing on that is I believe the original art has bloodstains from the soldier that's at Captain America's feet. But they had to delete that when they actually printed it because Schomburg probably thought that he was in 1942 and then he could do that. But in 1977, the code had been out for 20 plus years. And so I remember reading that and seeing that. You could Google that and look it up. But if you look at the original comic, there's no blood, I think, on the floor where the soldier is by Cap's foot.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Thank you for that. Thank you, Chris, for asking that question. And Ben, thank you for being able to answer that question in detail, other than a yes, that is true. He came back and did that. So we are now entering section 3 of our conversation, which we are calling Show and Tell. Ben and I had a back and forth over like the last 3 or 4 days about the books that he was going to show. And I think he loves Schomburg, and I think he has a deep inventory of comics, but he was able to whittle it down to about 10 books that we are actually going to show. And one thing that I want to make mention of here is that some of the books that Ben is going to show us from his personal collection are books that he has never really shown publicly before. Like he's maybe shown a friend or two that has come over or that he's met up with or something like that. But some of these have never been posted to social media and have not been widely shared. So this is really going to be a treat. And I want to thank Ben for being willing to come on the show again and for sharing these amazing books with us that people haven't really seen before. And I think that that's really cool. So Ben, you have, I think, a nice stack of books over there. Which one do you want to start with?
We're going to start with a Daring Mystery Comics #1, okay, which was on the newsstand in October 1939. So when I give you a month and the date, it's real time. Which is usually 2 to 3 months ahead of the cover's publishing month. So this first book is really January 1940 on the publication, but real time, it was out in October 39. I prefer to use the real time.
Of course you do, Ben.
So I hope everyone can see that. This is October 1939, and this was Schomburg's first cover for Timely. There were 2 other Timelies that were printed before this. Does anybody know what they were?
So Brad E. was very quick on the first Schomburg cover. He was very quick on that one. We have a clap from Knights of Old. And James is here. Welcome, James. So what was your question one more time, Ben, so that people can hear it?
Yeah, my question was, this was the first Schomburg cover for Timely, but this was the 3rd Timely overall that was published. Does anybody know what the first 2 Timelies were that were published prior to this book?
Brad E says Marvel Comics 1.
That's correct. And the second?
And that's the one with the Human Torch on the cover. I just read that one. That's actually a really good book.
That's correct.
Bob says, I'm not that smart. There's really only like a handful of people that can really answer that question.
the second book, the second Timely was Marvel Mystery Comics #2. So
Marvel Mystery Comics 2. There you go.
Yeah, and this was the 3rd one. So interesting thing about this is that Joe Simon was hired to be the full-on chief editor by Martin Goodman at that time. And this was really their second title. Marvel Mystery was their flagship title. And so Joe Simon came in, he created this character here, Fury Mask, who doesn't exist anymore. But they decided to enlist Schomburg to start doing some of the covers. So this kind of has a sci-fi feeling to it. And it's very pulpy still. It kind of has a little bit of a 20s and 30s look to it, the girl in bondage, and the character here, and then the background. So that is the first Schomburg cover for Timely, which I
And
thought
we're
was
going to
really
give
cool.
your audio a second to kind of work itself out. We started to have a little difficulty hearing you at the end, but Ben was gracious enough to also pull some of the CGC data for me. That's normally part of what I do, but he was gracious enough to do it. CGC actually has 20 blue labels on record in the census, and then 42 books overall. I'm guessing some are restored or incomplete, et cetera, et cetera. But there are 20 blue labels and 42 in totality. And I guess Ben has one that is actually not on the CGC census because his is actually raw.
It actually is, but it's been cracked out.
Oh, I forgot you do that.
I
what
don't.
was the grade on that?
It was 1.0.
A 1.0. Okay. It's a gorgeous book to be a 1.0, man.
Yeah, there's some spine issues in it, but it was cracked out actually before I bought it, and I have the label still. So it's actually, I think, the only 1.0 on the census. So
Got
uh,
it.
it's a pretty difficult book, and if I see a nicer one, I will not hesitate to buy it.
And DS Comics says 42 on the census, 42 not for sale. DS is he's a young guy, but he is an old school guy at heart, you know? All right, so we have 9 more books to go. What's the next book that we want to show people? Because the first one I think blew people's mind, right? So let's just keep the mind blowing going.
All right, here we go. Nice and bold will like this one. Hopefully that glare isn't too bad. This is Marvel Mystery Comics number 4. This is the first ever Submariner cover, and it was done by Schomburg. One of the interesting things here is that he was actually drawn with no wings on his ankles. And that was probably because Bill Everett created Submariner, and Schomburg was drawing all these from his home in his office, so he might not have had an idea that he had ankles or wings on his ankles. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, we can see it. Your audio is a little off, but I think people can hear you. So I'll recap. Marvel Mystery number 4, December 1939. This is the first Schomburg Submariner cover. He was drawn without wings on his ankles because Schomburg was actually drawing at home and going from memory and may not have known that he actually was supposed to have wings. Yes?
Correct.
What else can you tell us about that gorgeous book as people are over here clapping, talking about wow, beautiful, et cetera, et cetera?
It's not easy to find. I actually, for whatever reason, I was not the hugest fan of this cover for the longest time. And I have to thank, shout out to my buddy Florida Frank. I'm going to call him Florida Frank. He's a big timely Golden Age guy, and he got me into this book. And he said, you got to have it. It's the first time Submariners want to cover, and it's a Schomburg cover. How could you not have it? I said, you know what? You're right. I should have that. So, I was able to locate one. A funny story is that this book came out of Eastern Pennsylvania estate. It was in a wooden cubby hole, and in it were a bunch of Archies, and this was the only superhero book in it.
Wow.
So I was happy that it got rescued.
So a couple of notes that you made for me that I'll tick off is that this was actually the first Nazi swastika on a Timely cover. And it was, I think you wrote here, second behind Top Notch 2. And that was November 1939. Yeah?
That's correct. I forgot to mention that. That was the first Nazi swastika on a Timely at that time.
And there was a couple of questions here in the room for you. One comes from Victor, and Victor wants to know what type of mylar do you use for your Golden Age? Do you use the 2 mil or the 4 mil?
It's actually the 4 mil on the bigger books, on the bigger slabs, because those things are gigantic. So you need a little bit of a thicker mylar for that one. That's a good question.
Yep. And Party Time Comics is in the house. Wayne McDonald is here. It is definitely good to see you guys. Thank you for taking time out. We are 2 books into our 10-book run. So far, we have looked at Daring Mystery number 1 and Marvel Mystery number 4. And we are now moving. Oh, before we go on to the 3rd book, I should also say that when you look at the CGC census for that last book, the Marvel Mystery number 4, there are 26 blue labels and 48 total on the CGC census. And Ben, that book was slabbed, yes?
That's correct. That's it. It is a
Okay.
slab.
And now
Correct.
we are going to move on to our third book. What do you have for us?
Third book. This is a classic Schomburg, first Schomburg torch cover, Marvel Mystery #5. Um, I love this cover as well. Probably one of the best earlier covers. Very difficult book. I mean, these green men throwing in this girl in a glass tube into a furnace. I mean, it's very pulpy still, very early 30s like. Um, so yeah, I mean,
Are those asbestos suits that they're rocking?
probably
I thought that was
19.
one of the things that was cool about like Timely One was they actually put the Human Torch, who was an android, in a glass tube like that and sank him in a pool or something because his flames were out of control. He was burning up the city and stuff like that. But clearly that glass tube is a little bit of a theme there.
Yeah, glass tubes with beautiful women trapped in bondage.
And asbestos suits before we knew that stuff would kill you.
Correct.
But that is a gorgeous book. Someone is actually Chris Barrett was asking where my Schomburg books were. Chris, the secret is every other book that Ben shows you is actually my book, but I'm letting him take credit for them. So there you go.
We're friends.
So it's our book.
Yeah. For the next 45 minutes.
Yeah, right. Oh, brother, I heard that. Well done. So this is Marvel Mystery #5. There are 24 of these on the CGC census. I'm sorry, 24 blue labels on the census, and then 37 overall on CGC census. Well done. He said for the next 45 minutes, it's our book. After that, it's all mine. That's what he just said. That is awesome. DS Comics says he loves the old school machinery and gadgets and gauges and dials. I mean, to the point though, Ben, that's something that we talked about was that's essentially what Schomburg is known for, is basically cramming those covers just full of so much intricate detail versus just like slapping some stuff up and blurring out the background.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. I have these books double mylar, so I'm going to take the sleeve off. I'm going to take the sleeve off and see if that helps with the glare. This is probably one of my top 3 favorite books of all time. I've got a 25-year, I've got like a 25-year history with not this particular copy, but with this book in itself. Marvel Mystery #9. It was inevitable that Goodman was going to have fire and water just go together and clash. It made sense. You got two, anti-heroes here, and let's have two heroes fight for the very first time in comics history because, Batman sir wasn't fighting Green Lantern or Superman at that time, and Captain America wasn't even a thought yet. So, here we go.
But this became like a whole thing, right? I mean, the fire and water was like a whole thing for a period of time, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, there were several issues, Human Torch 5, 8, which I'll show next. Those were battle issues, but the Marvel Mystery 7, 8, 9, 7, it was already brewing in the story. They were telling the Torch, yeah, this Submariner guy, he's going to come to New York City and he's going to get you. And so it was already hinted. And then in the 8, they actually started to tangle with each other. And then the 9, this is where the full goods were delivered with the cover and the full battle. So this cover is actually a Schomburg and an Everett cover. I believe Schomburg did a lot of the inks, and Everett did most of the pencils. But the records were really shoddy back then as far as exactly who did what. But if you look at the details here, I really like the rivets here on the bridge.
That's crazy.
I mean, like we're talking about bridge work here. Schomburg was just a master at that. And of course, what's this guy going to do? He's not going to do anything. Then you got the folks in the back.
Bro, he's riding a Vespa. Okay. That's a Vespa.
And these guys aren't going to do much either. I'm sorry.
At least they're in a Buick,
Yeah. So yeah, that's cool. In the sidebar, Goodman started doing the sidebar with a lot of these Marvel mysteries, but yeah, just a killer cover. I remember seeing this for the first time in the photo journal and just not knowing what to do with myself. And this is one of the books that I will always have in my box as long as I'm collecting, for sure.
That is just a gorgeous book, brother. That is Marvel Mystery number 9 from May 1940. The CGC census has 35 blue labels and 49 total. That is a gorgeous book, man.
Thank
I
you.
don't I had not seen that book before, but that's a nice cover. I dig that one.
One thing about Golden Age, I mean, Timely's, but Golden Age in general, is that these are big bedsheet books. They're gigantic. And being gigantic, they feel, and you get a different experience when you have them in your hand, is what I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah, maybe
So,
I can actually hold one next time I come over.
yeah,
Because
yeah, yeah.
you just let me hold Hulk 1 and Amazing Fantasy 15 and ASM 3, Hulk 3. You didn't break out any Golden Age for it, brother.
Yeah, well, you got to crawl before you walk.
Well done, brother. All right. All right, so we've looked at, I think, 4 books so far. What's the next book that we're going to check out?
Okay, so that last book was kind of in my opinion, the best Submariner cover. Very stoic. This next battle issue is more of a torch cover, and it's in your face cover.
Oh, hell, hold on. Put that book down one sec. Give me one sec, man. So DS Comics here says AF-15 might as well be X-Force 1 compared to this stuff.
Well, that's a harsh statement. I mean,
that is hard, but these are nice books, right? They're nice books, but
if you're talking rarity, yes.
But X-Force 1, bro, come on.
Yeah, that's I think Spider-Man deserves a little bit more than that.
DS Comics is a good friend, so he's just poking fun at me. All right, let's go with this book, bro. Let's see the next one.
Okay, so this is a Schomburg cover. Again, you got the detail with the bridge and the rivets, how it's melting right here. Really cool. The only thing I like about this is the anti-flame gun. I mean, I'm sorry, Subby, but that's not going to do much in my opinion. But this is an in-your-face, huge torch cover. I've always loved the pose. And again, we're talking about poses here. I love how his arm is just, the way they're angled and how he's taking a swipe. This book actually was the one that I got. Not this actual copy, but in '96, this was the first battle issue I got, and I actually traded this and some cash to get my first Marvel Mystery 9. But I would say this is the poor man's Marvel Mystery 9. If you can't afford the Marvel Mystery 9, you get the Torch 8 because this is a pretty comparable cover.
To be honest with you, I think that's one of my favorite covers. That's one I've seen that one several times. That one and the one where he is bending Submariner's gun. Those 2 covers are the ones that are in my mind from Schomburg, and I love that cover.
Yeah, and by the way, just from some perspective, this is the George Washington Bridge that they actually fight on. Inside, there's a centerfold spread with both of them fighting on the bridge. It's really cool. So, it was New York City. That's, Schomburg knew New York City, and that's what they put in the books at the time.
So, man, what you're saying is that the cover art actually matches the interior art. Imagine that. Imagine that. There's been a whole theme about that as of late with variants and the disconnectedness of the cover and the interior art. So this is when they did it right back in the 40s.
Yeah. This particular book, I really suggest if you get it, you want to get this with some fire engine red. The reds here sometimes can fade, and you don't want a faded Torch 8. You need this to pop. The Mylar will help, but you want the colors on the red to be fabulous when you look for a copy on this one. And I've owned several of these, and I've had some that weren't as bright, and you want it to be bright.
So a couple of comments here. Knights of Old says that there are 3,000 AF-15s on the census, less than 50 of these. That is true. There's no comparison, and we know it. We know that. And then Knights of Old also says Neymar does not need a gun. That's what he's saying. Do me a favor. Can you show that cover one more time and pull back just a little bit so people can really drink that in just a little bit? And Joe is breaking out his red pen for his version that he's going to have to color in a little darker. But let me stop talking so that they can see the book. Say something for me, Ben.
Oh, yeah. So here's another close-up. The anti-flame gun has always been humorous. Many timely enthusiasts actually joke at that. Why he has it, I don't know. But that's what Schomburg depicted him in this one. So, there you have it.
And you mean timely enthusiasts like the 50 of you that actually possess this book?
There's a little more than that. This book is actually somewhat common for a timely. I have seen a lot of them. The Marvel Mystery 9, forget about it. I haven't seen one come to sale publicly in about 4 years.
That's crazy.
People like to hold on to that one, and I'm one of them.
Yep. All right, cool. Let's roll to the next book. One thing I will tell you is that somehow, some way, I was first exposed to the Android Human Torch as a kid. And I don't know where or how, but I remember the Android Human Torch, and I was so confused with the Fantastic Four Human Torch, and I wish that I remember where I saw that, and I wish that I'd had that comic.
Yeah, the Human Torch was an android, and the Fantastic Four version was the teenager that was able to acquire his powers from the cosmic storm.
Yep.
Right.
But the younger me was like, I didn't understand that. The younger version of me, it took me a little while to really embrace that.
Right.
So what's the next one? What are we rolling on next?
Okay, next one, bar none, the best Captain America Schomburg cover of the Golden Age, period. I like the pose, the parachute. This is one of the ones that caught my eye when I saw the photo journal. Chris, if you're watching, I know you want this book. The pose and just the symmetry with the torch flying, and Schomburg started to draw his characters giant. If you could see here, look how small those Nazi soldiers are that are coming off the castle there, and look how big the heroes are. I mean, I just like the gun and the detail right there with the parachute. I mean, that's what I love right here. I can look at this all day long. There are some covers that I just get bored of. And I'm not trying to knock it. Captain America 1 is a great cover with Hitler, but I can look at this all day long. Cap 1, I get a little bored of. I know I'm going to hit some flack for that, but I do. I don't know why. But this one, I can just stare at it all day long. Jet black cover too. You get a lot of color touch on this book. So if you're going to buy this raw, number one, I wouldn't buy it raw. Number two, make sure that you check for color touch, because that's very common on this book.
Go ahead, I cut you off. I apologize.
No, it's okay. The colors on this one are pretty good. And again, you want to get, a book like this with decent colors, because a faded all select one just doesn't do it as well. This one is really sharp. And actually, I have an Alex Schomburg signature in pen on the inside cover of this. I didn't realize what I had. Reg, I've had this book since 2001. Mm-hmm. So as books stay with me, they really do stay with me. Yeah. But it is legitimate. He didn't sign a lot of stuff, but I have a poster on my wall here of Captain America 37. It's a lithograph, 150 signed. It's close. It looks exact to me. So, I'll roll with it.
Looks legit. So this is somebody was asking, this is all select number 1, September 1943. This is a classic Schomburg cover. There are a total of 92 on the CGC census, and there are 58 blue labels. Knights of Old says he'll bid $5,000 for that book. So let's ask that question, Ben. You are showing us some amazing books, right? Books that don't come up for sale often, books that people literally only see in other books, right? Like the photo journal. Are any of these books for sale?
Like I said to everybody, probably not, but every item has a price, and there's always an I don't want to sell it price. But even if that I don't sell it price is given to me, I still may not accept it. So,
it's probably safe to say that 5,000 is not the I don't want to sell it price.
Actually, the one I'm holding in my hand, it's a lot more than $5,000.
Yeah. I wanted to just communicate that tonight's old, but I do that jokingly because I know the two of you guys are friends, and I have a feeling that that's an old conversation right there. So just having a little fun with that one.
He owes me a Captain America number 2, and he can explain that to you maybe if he gets on the show.
Wait a minute. He owes you a cap. Is that what I just heard?
I'm being sarcastic, but there was a cap too that I was looking at, at a show about 3 years ago, I think 2 years ago, and the dealer didn't want to sell it because it was part of a run. I said, I understand. I said, if you change your mind, just call me. And I think he wanted it as eye candy as he went to shows up and down the coast. Well, he goes up to Seattle, where Knights of Old lives, and a couple days later, Knights of Old is like posting it on CGC boards. I'm like, dude, man, how did you buy that? Because the dealer said he would call me if he was going to sell it. He goes, I don't know. I just offered him some money and some trading, and he took it. I said, oh man, you're
Oh,
killing me.
man. That's
So
hilarious. So you're right. He owes you a cap too now.
yeah, but it's cool, man. It's cool. He's a timely guy, so I mean, I can't hate him too much.
That is awesome. Felix, thank you for stopping by, brother. He says that he has to get into bed. So thank you for swinging by. Tony Trebetta asks, does Ben have any cap books of Alan Bellman that he drew? Met him at the last con he went to. He did a lot of Captain America from the Golden Age.
Yes, I do. I do have some Bellman interior art on some of the books. In fact, this next book does have Bellman, I think, on the interior. Bellman didn't do any covers, to my knowledge. And if he did, I don't have any, but I do have some interior artwork of Bellman. I've met Bellman before. He lives in South Florida. Great guy. Him and his wife do a lot of shows. And he's really one of the few Golden Age greats that's really left. And I think he might be the only one from that time period because they're all gone.
And that's where Tony Trebetta is. He's actually down in Florida, so that's probably where he met him. Friendly Neighborhood Luke, it is good to see you, brother. Welcome to the live stream. I think the next book that we're going to look at is All Select #2. Is that correct, Ben?
Oh yeah, this is. I got a story behind this one too. First of all, one of the few green covers in a timely run. But man, look at that big old gun. I love that big old gun right there. And then look at the bullets, the detail. You could see the rounds going through. Hopefully, you could see how they're on one side, and then after he shoots them, they're out. And then the shield, and again the parachute. Look at those planes. That's typical Schomburg. Taking apart the big Japanese bridge. This is obviously in the Pacific Ocean somewhere. And I always look at this star. I'm a guy of detail. This is a single staple book. Starting in around 1942-43, the war shortage changed the staples from double to single, especially with Archies and MLJ and Timelies. So this is a single staple book. So is the All Select one I just showed you. The Marvel Mysteries I showed you were all double staple books because those were pre-war. Okay, except the Marvel 5. The Marvel 5 Torch cover has 3 staples for some reason.
Wow.
I thought that was weird, but every Marvel 5 I've seen and owned has 3 staples. So I don't know why that is. But going back to this shield, the staple is usually always right where the star is. And you can see the staple there, I think, in the bag. You can see it right there. But I like my copies of this book with most of the star shown. I don't like when that star is wrapped to the back and you can't see hardly any of it. So that's one of my pet peeves that I start looking at for this particular book. I know this book very well. I was sniped in 2000 on eBay for this book. Somebody had sniped it and I lost it. And then funny thing is, 3 years later, the guy offered it back to me at $500 less than he won it.
Hilarious.
So I ended up buying it back from him. And, I've had several copies since, but over the years, I like this one a little better than the one. And I think it's because of the green cover. It is rarer than the one. And that big gun just does it for me right there.
And so let's talk about that. This is a All Select #2, December 1943 classic Schomburg Japanese bridge. To Ben's point, there were 33 of these on the CGC census, of which 27 are blue labels. So definitely rarer than the All Select #1. The trivia about the single staple, double staple, triple staple, brother, that is part of the reason why you're on this show, because I don't think I know I did not know that. And so it's just these little extra tidbits that go beyond just showing the great art that I think is fantastic. So thank you for layering that stuff in there.
Yeah. And I like it so much. I got another one. This is my Slab 5.5.
Come on, man. Stop showing out. Don't show out.
I got 2 of them here. So you can compare the shields there. I'm a real nut when it comes down to this, see how they're cool like that. And yep, I could just stare at this all day long. That's why I bought another one, because I've had this one, the raw one, for 16 years. No, 13 years, and I've had this one for only about a year and a half.
That's
So
crazy.
I just can't get enough of these, man. I love it.
Did
So
you crack the raw one out? Well, no, you've had it for that long. CGC
yeah,
wasn't even around back then, right?
this was raw when I got it. I just never slabbed it, and
Yeah.
then I got this one that was already slabbed when I bought it. So,
Very
but
cool, man. I love
yeah,
that. I mean, that
thank
that
you.
is, I don't know that I've seen a green cover Golden Age book.
The only other ones would be Submariner 10. There's a green cover. There's a couple of other ones. All Winners 10. I was
Okay.
just talking about this with Knights of Old a little while ago, and I think there's one more. I can't remember, but there's not many of them. They didn't use green very much. Yellow, black was very common. Red was a common one.
And I'm a big
Um,
fan of red covers, so I'm on board with that. Leonard is asking a question of how do you go about assembling a collection of that sort? I mean, you've been buying books for 30 some odd years, so part of it is just the fact that you've been collecting for so long is part of what has helped, I think, and I'm reading into it, helped you be in a position to actually be able to buy some of these books just because you've been consistent in collecting.
really, it's just been filtering out what I really like. Like I said in the beginning, what's cool, but doesn't need to be in my collection. The other thing too is that, and I don't knock this, I don't do runs. I have a couple of runs in my collection: X-Men 94 to 121, Hulk 1 through 6, FF 1 through 14. Those are the only runs I have. They're all silver and bronze. But I don't do runs, so I don't get involved in a lot of that. I get more particular with the covers and the artists in the Golden Age. So I think my focus is very specific. And so that allows me to hunt more efficiently. And, I kind of learned to not sell gold to buy silver. So those are things that have helped me over the years. But it's a long time. It's I notice a lot of newer collectors today, they are able to jump from say bronze and go right to gold. More so than ever, probably because of the internet, the auctions. They have more access to see the covers right at their fingertips. They don't have to go buy a photo journal.
Mhm.
So it's a little easier for them to be able to do that. Back when I was doing it, there's no way I could get into Golden Age because I didn't know what they looked like. I'd have to go buy an index, but I didn't know that there was an index that, existed. So I had to go, flip through and buy, what I could and what I knew.
Yep. Chris Barrett is saying Hulk 1 through 6 is more like a mini series, not a run. That's true, right? Before it got discontinued, right? So,
And Chris
um,
is on point, man. Chris is on point tonight.
Chris is on fire every night, brother. He is hilarious. There's a couple of these guys, man, that just make me laugh every time I read one of their comments.
I have to consider it a run though because I only have 3 runs or two. So I have two
Otherwise,
runs
you
and a
only have
mini
two
run.
runs.
I got 2 runs and a mini run. So I'll go. I can agree with Chris on that one.
All right, so the next book that we're going to look at is USA number 8 from March of 1943. So we have 3 more books to go. The next one right now is USA number 8.
Yes, and I actually have 7 and 10, which are on my wall here. You probably
Showing out.
can't.
Just
You,
showing out.
you can't see them here, but there's something here that you can't. Most people don't recognize. And okay, so right here, he's on the plane. Okay, he's about to. Bucky's tied up. You see that? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, my AirPods just went out. Just to let you know. So he's about to get rescued here. Okay, so he's on the plane. Can you see behind me? This one right here, the 7. Where is it? This one. See how they're parachuting?
I think so.
Let's see if I can make that a little closer. See how they're parachuting?
Is Bucky under his arm?
Yeah, he's under his arm. Anyway, so they're now off the plane parachuting, and then that last one right there, they've landed on the Japanese ship.
So it's basically a
kind of
continuation of that same scene over the course of 3 issues.
Yeah, but it's 8, 7, and 10 in that order, and I don't think Schomburg meant to do that, but I noticed it about 3 years ago. And I said, wow. So that's why I have them out of sequence as far as numerical on the wall, because I want to see the sequence as what's happening.
Got it. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and I also like right here how we made the 10 cents part of the wing. Isn't that cool?
Versus just being kind of stamped on there as if an artificial thing. That's cool.
Yeah, that's part of the wing here. So
So,
Again,
we are looking at USA number 8 from 1943. There are 17 total on the census. 14 of them are Blue Label, and it is going to be a little hard to hear you, Ben, with the ear bud going out. But I think you're next going to roll into the Captain America comics number 3. But let you talk a little bit more so people can see that book one more time.
yeah, so you got some pretty good details here. You got the Japanese flag here. Can you hear me, Reg?
I can hear you.
Characters here. I actually had a friend that knows Japanese, and he said that he doesn't know what these symbols mean. And so I'm thinking, okay, this guy is somewhat fluent in Japanese, but he's telling me these characters aren't really meaningful. So, maybe Schomburg just made them up. I don't know, but they look cool on the plane.
He may have just been like, I needed to look like something official, so let me just jot some stuff out. That's funny.
The other thing too that's interesting is that the inside of the shield, he never was very consistent with the handles and the inside. There's not a lot of books where you see the inside of his shield. All Select One, you could see the inside of his shield, but he was somewhat inconsistent on how he decorated and how he made the handles here. So that's something that I always recognize when I see the inside of Cap's shield.
I don't remember seeing the rivets on the last one.
Yeah, I have it in the stack there. It's buried. It's actually different. It's very different. So
yeah.
I don't know why he was doing that. Maybe it was just, he was being creative, but the planes are signature Schomburg. I mean, these planes are very similar to the All Select 2 as far as what you see. So
Chris Barrett says Bucky always needs to be saved. Evan makes the comment that I am killing it with the great guests. So I think, Ben, that is a nod to you and the crazy rare books that you are actually showing based upon, again, what Knights of Old is saying. Chris, CW Comic Sales is saying Bucky and Robin should hang out because clearly both of them always need to be saved.
Correct. And I'm a bigger Bucky fan than Robin. I'm not into Robin.
Oh, yeah, you do a lot of Detective Comics or Batman books pre-Robin. I do know that.
Robin. Yeah, there's a couple of times I can tolerate him, but Robin just doesn't do it for me. So.
Well, after he got beat by that crowbar by the Joker. All right, so let's go ahead and roll to one of your favorite characters, right? The continuation as we go into Captain America Comics number 3, 1941. Why don't you break that one down for us?
There's a lot of action going on. This is a very desirable book. A lot of things going on. You got one of the rarer yellow covers. I think the 13 was the only other yellow cover in the run. In the book, you actually have the first time that Captain America throws his shield. So Joe Simon decided to say, you know what, let's have him throw the shield, because in issue 2, they changed the shield from a triangle shape to a round shield because they didn't want to get sued by MLJ, who had a character called Shield.
Yep.
And he had a shield as well that was triangular, and they wanted to stay clear of any potential lawsuits. So they said, Goodman said, hey, Joe, change his shield. So he said, let's make it round, and now he can throw it. And it's been round ever since. So you got that going on. You got all kinds of bondage here. You got Bucky strapped to a bomb. You got Betty strapped to a rocket. She's about to go to the moon. And then, of course, you got the Red Skull right there.
Super creepy. That is one of the creepiest Red Skulls ever.
Yeah. So, and by the way, you got Jack Kirby and Joe Simon on the interior art. And then this is Stan Lee's first work for Marvel. At the time, he was really just an office gopher getting sandwiches for all the artists. And, he wanted to participate, and him and Goodman were, through marriage, they were uncle and cousin, or uncle and nephew. And so he did his first work called The Trader's Revenge, which was like a 2-page prose with hardly any pictures. There's one picture in it. And the reason why they were required to do that is they were able to, at the time, qualify for the magazine subscription rate through the post office. So it was cheaper for them to print and distribute if they had that prose in there. So a lot of the Golden Age, you'll have that extra story in there. And that's what Stan Lee did. Stan Lee, he wrote that, and he actually signed it Stan Lee for the first time. So that was the first time he did any work, published work for Timely / Marvel.
Very cool. Very cool. And Knights of Old was very quick to point out that it was Stan Lee's first story. Joe is basically saying in the beginning, they did not care as much about continuity and consistency And then Chris Barrett says, "Poor Betty." How many pages is that book? Because I remember, I think I read Timely One, and it was like a collection of multiple stories, and it was thick. I mean, it was maybe 60 pages, if memory serves.
Yeah, Golden Age is typically 64 pager. It's a big book, so
Massive.
you're talking 16 back to back to the centerfold, and then 16 on the back end. And so they're really easy to count. Where it gets tricky is when you get like into the All Select range. All Select, I think, is like 56 pages. And then if you count the covers, you have 60. But then when you get into the late 40s, early 50s, you get into the 40 pagers. They were cutting down, and obviously the comics were getting smaller too by that time. So
Now there's no excuse for like what is it now? Are they 16 pages? They seem really short now for whatever reason. Very good, very good. And so this Captain America Comics number 3, 1941. There are 103 of these on the census, and 49 of them are Blue Label. But definitely a really cool book. And then we have one last book to show, and this one is going to be Suspense number 3 from February of 1944.
When I mentioned the photo journal coming out in 1989, the first page had the cover impression of the book I'm going to show, and that lit this book on fire in the 1990s. All Select 1 and Suspense 3 were probably the hottest books in that decade. Nobody knew about Suspense 3. It was buried. It's not a Timely. It's actually a publisher called Continental, the same publisher that did Catman comics. So smaller publisher, but you talk about the granddaddy of them all. Some people don't like this cover. Most of the people do. It has just the perfect mix of war and horror. And you really just have to look at that.
That's nice.
Full moon, bats, sweaty jungle, hooded Nazis,
sweaty men in the jungle.
sweaty men, hooded Nazis, swords, guns, knives, bondage, bonfire, and of course, the spear of freedom coming right there.
That is a cool cover, bro.
And it's red, just for you, Reg.
Brother, you know I like that. I mean, even with the Nazis and the other accoutrement, it's a nice book.
The centerfold is often missing from this book. It's a Wrath story. Many copies were actually published without that centerfold. The interior outside of an L.B. Cole story is garbage. I mean, there really isn't anything that you would want in this book outside of the cover. And you buy it for the cover and only the cover.
And I think we literally just talked about L.B. Cole in this book last week when Nerdy Girl was on the channel. So it's interesting that you actually bring it up now and highlight the fact that it's garbage.
There's a Schomburg cover right there. And I don't mean any disrespect to any of the artists that were in the book or people that like it. I'm just saying that's how awesome the cover is. People don't want the interior. They will buy incomplete copies of this book only because the cover is there.
Because the cover is what does it.
Yep. There's the Schomburg signature. You can see a nice little box right there. That's how he typically did it, right there.
Very cool. In this particular book, there are 35 on the CGC census, and 21 of them are Blue Label. That is a gorgeous cover. DS Comics says that is his all-time grail. And then he says, what's your I don't want to sell it price of that? We are not going to get you to answer that. We'll find a way to connect the two of you so that you can talk about that, because that may be a number that embarrasses me. So we're not going to do that one.
A little story behind this one. This book came out of a wooden trunk of Timely's in 1996, 95, mid 90s. It was the only non-Timely in there. This is in Minnesota. And it was sold to a comic shop owner. I can't remember the name of the comic shop. But the person I got it from, he bought this and the All Select 2 that came out of that wooden trunk. And I had the All Select 2 already, so he wasn't really shopping this, but I gave him a number at the time that I knew he might not be able to resist, and that I'm probably going to have to be eating top ramen for the next year. But, I had to have it because I had a 5.0 restored, but I ended up um, selling that one, and kind of wanted to get it back. And so, luckily, after about a couple of days, he said, "Yeah, okay, I'll sell it to you." So they
So
have it.
when you were eating your top ramen, did you use the seasoned packet or did you add your own seasoning to it to like dress it up?
Oh man, I put some spam in there. I put some extra rice. I mean, I had to fill it up, so I was getting a little bit of nutrients out of it. I wasn't gonna go. I wasn't gonna just be plain ramen.
Well done, brother. Well done. Again, the stories behind the covers that you kind of layer in there, that's what makes a lot of this really cool, man. Because there's a lot of history with your books, and I think that that's fantastic. And it goes back to the earlier question about what kind of collector you are. Even if you have the book, you're sometimes able to get a different book or you move a book on and you bring it on, but there is still some stories to be told behind the books. And I think that that's, for me, it's easy to buy the book and it's another to have an experience around that book that makes the acquisition so special and memorable. And I think that's what's really cool about some of the anecdotal stuff you've been able to layer on.
Yeah, and I think the longer I own a book, the harder it is to get out of my hands. You
Yeah.
know, like that All Select one I've had since 2001. I did have another copy in '96, and I actually learned from that one because that one had some restoration, which was disclosed to me, but I found out there was a little more on there that either the seller didn't know or didn't disclose. And I really wanted it. That's what the photojournal did to me, and I probably paid, I know I paid a lot for it, and I ended up getting rid of it just because I felt like I needed to start over. And sometimes that'll happen in your collection. You'll make some mistakes, which is fine. Um, and you'll learn from it. And then sometimes you'll take some chances and you'll realize, this is a book I like, and I might want to, have one in the box, so to speak, for a longer period of time. But it takes a lot of collecting and a lot of experiences to figure that out.
So that $150 that you spent on the original Gerber guide seems to have cost you a tremendous amount of money over the course of a lifetime. And to Leonard's comment here, he says, eating ramen and spam helps you to save up for some really awesome comics. Well said there. That is awesome. That is awesome. Ben then says yes. All right. So we have already answered the question around are these books for sale? Not really, but maybe so. If someone can name a number that is compelling enough to pry the book from your hand. So we're not going to talk about that anymore. But what I do want to do as we wrap this thing up is to ask you to give people some insight into how they can get in touch with you when it comes to social media platforms. Maybe people want to reach out. Maybe people want to see more of your collection. Can you give us a rundown of your social media and stuff like that so people can find you?
Yeah, sure. I'm on the CGC message boards primarily. So you can find me there at prime time. And that's actually what I go by. A lot of people at cons that know me from the CGC boards know me as prime time, and they'll call me that. On Instagram, I'm there as prime time comics. Um, YouTube is the only one where I don't use that name, and that's because when I tried to do it 12 years ago, it was taken, and I tried every combination of primetime with numbers, and it just wouldn't let me get it. So what did I do? I just said I'll just be Tech 31 Kid because that's my favorite Golden Age Batman cover.
There you go. So prime time is where people can find you. And before we wrap this thing up, Golden, a couple of things. I want to say hello to Burke Nasty 54 Comics. It's good to see you, brother. Collecto 6 is in the house. He says Alex Schomburg rocks. And then King of Golden State asks a question around what is the next book that you're looking to pick up?
I would say, either upgrading some of these Marvel mysteries or the Daring mystery would probably be it. But I'm actually kind of leaning towards maybe original art. And I know I talked to you about that. A Spider-Man Ditko page is really high on my list. And maybe an early FF Kirby page. It's got to be like 1962 though, because I like the Kirby airs. Uh, Pencil inker combination. But the right Ditko Spider-Man page, I might I might trade some serious books for that one, just because I need to experience it to see if it's something I want to get into. But I'm new to the OA game. I've watched it from afar. It's a very dangerous and expensive part of the hobby, and it's for most people the last frontier that people get into. Maybe not so much now, but for the longest time it was. So, but there's always something to collect. There's always something that catches your eye, and I don't try to look at things as far as I need it. Here's my want list. I don't really have want lists anymore. Every now and then I'll just go through my box. Like last week, I went through and I have some early 1950s detectives, which I can tolerate Robin on some of those because they're really tough. And I noticed I didn't have a Catman cover. I've got a Joker cover, I've got a Two-Face cover, some of the major villains, but I didn't have a Catwoman. So, I decided to pick one of those up. So that wasn't planned. I just opened my box and, it became a part of my want list.
Yep. Yep. So you shared some art with me before I think it was like your first official piece, and you were excited about it. Does that excitement remain? Are you still as excited about that book? As you were that day that it showed up? I'm curious.
What piece were you talking about again, Reggie?
It was the Kirby original art that you picked up. And there was the
Yeah,
whole
yeah.
discussion around this is like you dipping a toe into the water, you're trying to experience OA, and you were excited about it. And I'm just wondering whether that excitement is still there or whether it is waxed on that particular piece.
It's there. It's there. I still enjoy it. I have it, hanging against my wall. The problem with that is I picked up that piece because one, it was 1962, so it was right in that era of Hulk 1, Fantastic Four 5, Dick Ayers inking. But I don't know if I'm going to be able to get a shot at getting a Kirby FF page that I'm going to be happy with. And because it was relatively cheap compared to what those pages are going to be, I said, you know what? Let me experience it. Let me get it. Let me see how I feel. I talked to Chris a lot about this because he actually is more experienced in original art than I am.
Yep.
Because he has a lot of Jim Lee X-Men's and he's been doing that part of the hobby longer. So I still like it. I can't say that I'm going to keep it forever because I probably would be quick to sell or trade it, especially if I can get a better Kirby piece. But my goal is kind of to have one Kirby and one Ditko, even if the Ditko is pre-hero, just because the Spider-Man pages they're just ridiculous, and I'm still debating on if I would really trade some big Golden Age towards a Ditko page. It'd have to be the right page, not just any page to settle for one.
Yep. Yep.
And if that doesn't happen, I just may have to go for a pre-hero, Tales to Astonish Ditko page with some nice faces, and call it a day. And at least I got two original art pages from Kirby and Ditko.
There you go. All right. So again, Ben, I want to say thank you, man, for sharing some amazing books with us. I think by the comments that are being seen in the chat, I think people really appreciated it. Having an opportunity to see this collection, to see these books that maybe they haven't really had a insight into, that maybe they haven't seen in the photo journal, to actually at least be able to see it here virtually with you, I think was a real treat and a treasure for the folks that are in the chat, and also for me. I've really enjoyed this discussion with you, and I really appreciate you taking time out. I want to thank everyone that is in the chat, that have watched this, that joined us for this thing. If you're watching this thing on replay, I want to say thank you to you as well. And I want to remind everybody that if you have not yet subscribed to the channel, you definitely want to subscribe so that you can stay abreast of all the content that I release, like this live stream. You want to stay abreast of this stuff. And if you are already subscribed to the channel, you know that trivia night is coming up tomorrow. Tomorrow, we are going to be giving away a huge stack of comics as part of our trivia night. We're going to have all kinds of questions, possibly even some related to this live stream that we just did right now. So subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, join us tomorrow for for trivia night. And then be sure to check out the content that we release at 3:30 pretty much every Monday through Friday. If you guys need to reach me, feel free to do so at Regie Collects on Instagram and regiecollects@gmail.com. Thank you all once again. And Ben, I have a feeling you are probably going to have some messages coming your way.